So, good afternoon. I'd just like to say welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tracy Watson, and I'm just going to introduce you to the webinar, what we're going to do, explain the format a bit, how you can interact to get any answers to any specific questions that you might have. This is a 2-hour webinar providing an overview of the new rules that now need to be considered for exporting goods to Europe. There's quite a lot to take in, so there will be a short break halfway through so that you can stretch your legs or top up your coffee cups. There's quite a few registered today, so we've muted the microphones to control the sound interruptions, but you can post any questions you have throughout the session by clicking on the little Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. When you click on that, you can either choose to post your questions privately to the host only or publicly for everyone to see. We'll try to respond to as many questions as possible in the Q&A sessions that we're running, but if we do run out of time, we will add the Q&As to the practical guide that we'll be printing and publishing following the webinar, so it'll have a full transcript of the Q&As in there, without people obviously, just the transcript of the questions and answers. So if we don't get round to your question, don't worry, you will get it. We'll also be taking a recording of today's webinar, which will be made available through the Northeast Growth Hub and Tees Valley Business websites. Finally, before we get started, I just wanted to highlight today's webinar is being provided through the 2 regional growth hubs. So before we dive headlong into the session, I'd like to invite Craig Harrison from the Northeast LEP to say a few words about the support that they have available and for Northeast businesses, followed by Diane Barkas to say a few words about the Tees Valley business support before we then hand over to Ben. We'll finish with the final Q&A session and then we'll just give you a little bit more information of where you can get further support. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Craig Harrison from the Northeast LEP Growth Hub. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. Here just to say a few words on behalf of the Growth Hub, actually, which is part of the Northeast LEP. The Growth Hub serves as kind of a gateway for businesses to access the various types of support in the region. As you're all very aware, the last 12 months has been quite a journey, a lot of challenges. Prior to COVID-19, I mean, most of our work was working with businesses that were looking for growth strategies and to tap into support to help that, facilitate that. Then when March exploded upon us, and COVID-19 was on our shoulders, things changed very rapidly. So it was more along the lines of survival than growth. It's nice to see some changes are afoot, and people are working through whether it's pivoting their business or it's focusing on the what the roadmap looks like coming out of this. There are some changes to attitude. There are less of panic, but how the Growth Hub essentially works, just like Tees Valley, sorry. We basically sit alongside business, with an impartial element of the LEP that will be a sounding board, a listening post for businesses to listen to their challenges, and then hopefully put them in touch with the expertise that are there, the experts that have the expertise to help them out of a particular challenge. Most of the support that is in the region can be viewed on our website, so the Northeast Growth Hub, which is the portal area of the support in the region. The extension of that are ourselves, the Growth Hub connectors, the human element to it, the face front element to it, where we will talk to the businesses directly and help them navigate the support that's on that side, because I think at the moment it's up to about 300 schemes, so it can be a little bit of a minefield. I think the one way to interact with us would be, as you see on the screen, is to try and book an appointment. What we would advise is give us as much information as you possibly can. This does help us pre-call to do a little bit of research, maybe on yourselves, your business, but also from your asks and your needs, so that we're prepared for the phone call. That's my ask. And I think that more or less covers it from a basic point of view. But we are there, we'll help whichever way we can. So if you do have a particular challenge, or there's something on the site or the portal that you're interested in discussing further, then please get in touch.
Thanks very much, Craig. That's wonderful. If I can introduce Diane Barkis now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Diane Barkis, and I'm a growth consultant with Valley Business. I work with businesses across the Tees Valley within the local authority areas. Stockton-on-Tees, Redfern, Cleveland, Darlington, and Hartlepool. Can you put the next slide on, please, Ben? Craig did a fantastic introduction there in terms of the type of support that we're able to offer. Essentially, it's very similar. Tees Valley Business is a local programme which provides companies in the region with a one-stop shop, really, a first point of contact and a one-stop shop for a range of support to help businesses start up, grow, create jobs, and provide any information and support they might need in that respect, including comprehensive advice on funding opportunities, sources of finance, different finance options available, and most importantly, assistance with establishing links with those organisations. It's the same kind of principle, really, in terms of getting in touch with us. We have a website with a very comprehensive suite of information and resources on there. Obviously, you can see the contact details, which will be circulated following the session this afternoon. If you go onto the website to get in touch, there's an expression of interest. So you can just click on the top right of the website, fill in the form. Again, I'd make the same ask as Craig. The more information you provide us with, the better, essentially. Once we receive that, we should receive a call back within the next kind of couple of days. And then you'll be assigned to a business advisor or a growth consultant, depending on your needs. And we can then have a discussion and see how we can help your business to move forward, whether that be discussing growth opportunities, or indeed navigating our way through the current COVID situation. We do have an extensive range of support options out there. I suppose notably, a couple are some of the grant schemes that we operate. So we've got two in particular, the Tees Valley Growth Fund and the Tees Valley Business Fund. Substantial grants can be awarded through these. So if you are interested, then I would urge that, that you get in touch. Could you pop the next slide on, please, Ben? But the most important thing today, really, is the connection to our EU transition support team. Certainly the most relevant with the nature of today's session. So, for Tees Valley businesses, we have a dedicated 24-hour helpline with a team of specialist EU exit advisors that can provide one-to-one support to businesses on, well, you can see the range of different areas there. So initially, they can do Brexit health check, and then from that, provide a rapid information about the new deal, post the 1st of January, the new rules, and then more specific information there regards each of those subject areas, which I'm sure Ben will be touching on over the course of this afternoon's session. Again, the contact numbers there, as I say, that's a 24-hour helpline. Alternatively, you can contact us via the email address at the bottom there. And that's it, really. I just wanted to keep it brief. So it's just to say hello, who we are. Please get in touch if you think there's anything that we can support you with moving forward. We'd be delighted to speak to you. And that's it. Thanks very much. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks a lot, Diane. Okay, so without further ado, we won't hold you back any longer. Here is Ben Bradford with the EU Exit Exporting Goods to the EU workshop. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As we've already said, we're going to be looking at exporting goods to the EU. Going to take the process right from the beginning, what you can do in preparation, talk about different stages, and hopefully finish off with those goods arriving at your customer's door. So just have a little look at the agenda here. For us, as you can see, we're going to split it into two parts. We're going to talk about preparation, what you can do in advance, the sale of your goods, whether that's to an existing customer or a new customer, finally moving your goods, and then eventually ending on how you can avoid pitfalls and try and give a bit of a practical guidance on what can go wrong. Like I said, we'll split that into two parts with a Q&A session at the end of each. So this again just highlights the kind of things we'll be covering. I suppose on this slide, just note that we are going to be talking about the different rules for B2B and B2C, so business to consumer sales as well, because there are a few different rules, a few different things that you might want to think about, and hopefully we'll try and cover that throughout for everybody. So at least all goes well, it's relatable to everyone and there's something that people can relate to. So to help us explain what the theory means in practice, we're going to be using Business Bob, our avatar, to give you a bit of an idea of the practical implications. So for the purposes of this, we're going to say that Bob owns a sports business where he's looking to export the three below items. So we're going to start with ski boots, manufactured and produced in China, protein bars, manufactured and produced in the UK, and also a snowboard, which is also manufactured and produced in the UK. And our Business Bob, our avatar, he's going to be trying to sell these goods to businesses and consumers in the EU. So try as much as possible to cover every area so there's something that is relatable for all of you. Now, first things first, and as you're all aware by now, the UK has obviously left the EU. We're no longer part of the EU, but we have agreed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So the important questions which everyone asks is, what is different and what do I need to do now? What do I need to do differently? And that's what we'll cover throughout. But I think the number one thing, and the thing that I'll try and drum home throughout, is be prepared. Make sure you have everything ready before you try to send your goods to the EU. Okay, the better prepared you are, the easier it is for you, the easier it is for your customer, and hopefully greater the chance of repeat business. And talking about preparing, first place we'll start is preparation. And obviously what you can hopefully do in advance. Again, this isn't kind of a definitive list. The more you can do, the better it'll be for you. But hopefully if we just touch on a few of these areas, you can see how that can help you in the long run. So first, and the best place to start would be GB EORI number, or to give its full name, the Economic Operators Registration and Identification Number. Now, if you don't already have one, you will need a GB EORI number before you're able to move goods to the EU. Okay, it's a must. The application process is free and takes roughly 5 to 10 minutes to complete. It should take, it says at most, 5 working days to obtain the EORI number, but known of cases where it can take a couple of hours, an afternoon. So it really shouldn't take much out of your day. Now, your GB EORI number, what it'll be is it'll have the GB prefix at the beginning, your VAT number in the middle, and followed by a couple of zeros at the end. But just to stress, even though it has that VAT number in the middle, generally speaking, you don't need to be VAT registered to apply for the EU EORI number. Sorry, GB EORI number. And we've got a link there of how you can apply. Don't worry about copying that down if you miss any of the links. The slides will be available at the end with the worksheet as well, and you'll be able to get the links from there. So in some circumstances, you may need another EORI number in addition to your GB number. Now, this will depend on the terms you've agreed with your buyer You may be responsible for arranging the import of the goods into the destination country. If so, you'll be recorded as the importer on record, and that's a term we'll come to later. And to get the goods into the country, you'll need to use the appropriate EORI number for the destination country. So we've got a couple of examples here. And firstly, we're going to touch on if you trade with Northern Ireland, or if your goods even pass through Northern Ireland, you may need to use an XI EORI number, which is specific to Northern Ireland. If you believe that this may apply to you, I would strongly suggest signing up to the Trader Support Service. If you're unaware, then it is a free service which is designed to provide support and guidance on trading with Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Protocol. So that should be your first point of call to try and get some specific advice and guidance on Northern Ireland and what you need to do for your goods. Second point we've got there is relevant for if you will be listed as the importer of record in the EU, then you will need an EU EORI number. You will have to contact customs in the EU country to obtain that EU EORI number, which will be prefixed with the initials of the country you applied to. So in the same way that the GB EORI number has GB at the beginning, for example, the French EORI number will start with the prefix FR. What you may want to do though is speak to your courier or another third party, as they may have an EU EORI number you can use. Okay, so have that conversation with them, and we'll come to their role in the process later, but it's worth bearing in mind that it's worth having the conversation with them because they may have that EU EORI number to hand, which you are able to use. So now you know we've covered EORI numbers there. I appreciate a lot of you probably already have your GB EORI number, but if you haven't, then now you know where to obtain that. Hopefully as well, you can now start thinking about other EORI numbers you may need and require, and hopefully aware of where you need to go for support. So with that now, we'll look a bit more closely at your products, and most notably, the commodity codes. Now, a commodity code is how customs classify your goods. The code will tell you and customs what is inside the container or package, whether any restrictions are applicable, e.g. dual-use goods that could be adapted for military use, or if you're trading with restricted countries. It will tell you whether any duty or VAT is payable when exporting your product to your chosen destination, whether any other specific rules apply to that product, such as health certificates, and what requirements your product needs to follow for preferential tariff rate, which is something, again, we'll come to in a bit. Just so you're aware, on an export, the commodity code will generally be 8 digits long. An example of an export in a commodity code is there for you. Now, to give a bit of context to these two links, at the bottom top link, probably advises as a good place to start for some general information on how to classify your goods and to understand the tariff code and how to use it properly. I'd recommend starting with the first link there. The second link, I would use that to actually classify your goods, because it provides you with some important footnotes and chapter notes which provide some further guidance on the types of products which are covered in that chapter. And just as important, it can tell you what is not covered in that chapter as well. And some examples of how to use this link will follow in a couple of slides. Now, appreciate that in some cases, it's not always as easy to locate the right commodity code or find the one which best fits your products. Or simply, it may be the case that you want some reassurance that you've classified your goods correctly. Now, in those instances, there is support available from HMRC. So we'll take these all in turn, starting with the first one there. You can get some informal support via email. This takes roughly 5 working days to receive a response, and this response and this service is not legally binding. It could be a quick service to use if you need a a quick response and you just want some peace of mind that HMRC have come to the same conclusion as you following your own research. So if you read and understand the tariff yourself to come up with what you think is your best commodity code, you can use this service as well, just to give you a bit of backup and, like we said, a bit of a peace of mind. Your second option may be if you want to obtain, or if you feel you need to obtain, a legally binding decision, then you can do this by obtaining what is called an advanced tariff ruling. Generally, these will be valid for 3 years and provide you with some legal certainty over your commodity codes. Unfortunately, it takes roughly 120 days to get a response, so this may be a good long-term option, but you may need to just think about what you can do in the short term just to try and get your goods moving. And it is worth noting there, the bottom bullet point, that in all likelihood, if you're struggling to identify your goods, then someone else would be having a similar problem trying to identify a similar product. So you may wish to search the advanced tariff rulings which have already been agreed, because when HMRC provide an advanced tariff ruling, they will add it to the list, which will give a brief description of the product and the advanced tariff ruling which they came to. So if you have a look through this list, it may save you time if you find an advanced tariff ruling for a product which you feel fits your goods. So it's always worth just to give that a little check as well. Now, it's important to remember that HMRC only make their decision based on the evidence and the information you provide them. So if your evidence is misleading or vague at all, then it may lead to you being provided with inaccurate guidance or support. So obviously, more detail you provide, more accurate detail you provide, you should get a better outcome from any of these services. So what we'll look at now is commodity codes in a bit more of a practical sense. So we're using Business Bob here as an example, and the ski boot we've got here. So what we're doing there is just talking through what he's done or what you can do. So we started off with that, with the link, with the service. We've gone onto the website. If you really don't know where to start, what chapter to look in, then you can just write a general description of your goods, which we've done here with ski boots. That's led us along the right lines and the right path. We've gone through the different headings and subheadings until you can see there that it's come up with the commodity code of 64021210. So remember, it's 8 digits for export, 10 digits generally for importing. Now what we'll just do is switch that around, so now you can see the computer screens for what would have done there. So we're using the trade tariff, we're using that link. The first screenshot on the left hand side there, you can see how it's broken down. So we've got the chapter, we go through the headings and the subheadings until we find the right code or the best code for our goods, which in this case is the 64021210. You'll see at the bottom on the left hand side there, it will give you the 10-digit commodity code for importing and the 8-digit for the exporting. The right hand side screenshot, all that is if you scroll down from the left hand side, that is the information you would get. And all that is just an example of when I said earlier about the chapter notes. That is an example of the type of information you'd get from the footnotes and the chapter notes below. And as you can see, actually, number one there is this chapter does not cover. So again, it can give you a bit of guidance if you think you're in the right area, but you're not quite sure. As a second example, we'll look at exporting the protein bar. As you might notice here, or you may note that within the tariff and within the headings and the subheadings, it's a lot more detailed in terms of the raw materials and the percentage weight of those raw materials. Now, if you're someone who exports these type of products, then you should have that information to hand to help you work through that. But again, like any of these products, if you're not quite sure, we've mentioned the HMRC services that are there for you. But as you can see, we've worked through the headings, and for the protein bar, we've agreed on 2106 1020. And as his final product now, we'll look at exporting the Snowboard. And again, just quickly for you, you can see how we've started with the chapter. We've run through the different headings and subheadings and come to the 95061121. Now, quickly to note before we move on all these examples, you'll have seen that it says this information is for the 15th of March 2021. Now, it is important to note that they do make amendments to the trade tariff and it is updated. Sometimes these are only slight updates, but it's worth getting in habit, and it's a good habit to get into, of just checking the commodity code before you ship your goods. So regardless of whether you've moved your goods for 1 month, 6 months or years previously, just get in the habit of putting in your commodity code and check that it still fits and still gives the best result for your goods. Now, we've touched there on the EORI number and commodity codes. There's certainly a couple of things that you can do as a minimum, really in advance. And we'll talk about later some other things which you can pull in from there, which also you can do to prepare, because like I said, it all comes down to better prepared you are, easier it is for you and easier it is for your customer. And speaking about customers, we'll now move on to either locating a customer or dealing with an existing customer. So for Business Bob, for our examples here, we're going to talk about a business in France, a business in Germany, and a consumer in Austria. So we'll touch on both B2B sales and B2C as well. And first things first, when you're talking about customer, we need to talk about the sales contract. Now, appreciate that sales contracts will be familiar to you. However, previously, when dealing with the EU, it was no different to sending your goods down the road to Newcastle or Leeds, for example. So it is important that we look at the sales contract from an international trade point of view. Now, I just want to highlight that this list is a minimum of what you should look to consider and include. It may be that you've already included some other information in your sales contract, and that's fine, that's great. All I'm trying to do here is get you to think about the process and whether you need to make any amendments going forward. So some of these areas may be easy for you and your customer to agree upon. For example, who is the buyer and the seller. But other areas require us just to delve a little deeper to help to fully consider and appreciate the responsibilities and the repercussions. So as a minimum, what should you include and consider in your sales contract? So you've got the name and address of the buyer and seller, when goods will be delivered, how are the goods to be transported, where will the goods be delivered to, what is the agreed price for the goods, and what does that price cover? What remedies are available if something goes wrong, if an item is damaged or contract cannot be fulfilled? When do the goods legally change ownership? When and how will payment be made? And what currency is to be used, and what/how will the exchange rate be determined? So like I said, some of these points may be straightforward to agree upon, but as an example, we're just going to delve a little bit deeper into the price which is agreed and, most importantly, what that price covers. Because unfortunately, this will have become more complex since the 1st of January. Right, the price you agree is for more than simply the word for the product and the transport. Most notably, since 1st of January, you're looking at things like your import VAT and your customs duty, which we will mention in full later on. But again, this is not a definitive list, but costs can be incurred via packaging, loading, handling and securing, transport, insurance, whether are you gonna hire a customs broker to complete declarations for you, any transport charges, any storage charges. So whether your goods are stored for overnight or even an evening, afternoon, you're likely to incur a storage charge, import VAT, customs duty, and finally unloading at the point of destination. So just give this all a bit of context. Some of these costs may be incurred 2 or even 3 times during the journey from seller to buyer. So as a quick example, you may load the goods onto the back of the van leaving your warehouse, and they may be transported and unloaded at Leeds container depot, maybe a storage charge there before they're loaded again onto a lorry who takes your goods to T-Sport, for example, where they'll be unloaded before again being loaded and secured onto a container ship, travel to the EU port where they're unloaded again. There might be another storage charge before finally being loaded onto another lorry where they're delivered to the agreed destination. So suddenly, just from that short example, the process gets slightly more confusing, costs start to rise, and both you and your buyer need to understand who will be responsible for these costs and the risk that comes with that as well. And that is where the Incoterms come in. So the Incoterms are 11 rules which consider the journey of goods from the seller to the buyer. Within the journey, it focuses on 3 key areas, so mainly the obligations, the cost, and the risk. And each term varies in who's responsible for the goods at each stage of the journey. And it's crucial that you agree on the best Incoterm for you and your customer when the sales contract is agreed. And it is important that you not only agree on the Incoterm, but both parties fully understand their responsibilities and the repercussions. So whether you negotiate your sales contract or it's handled by a designated sales team, you need to make sure that whoever it is understands the Incoterms and appreciates the repercussions on your business. So as I mentioned, the Incoterms vary, and they can vary from the buyer being responsible for transportation, the costs and the risk of the goods for the entire journey, all the way to the opposite, where it's the seller who's responsible. Some of the Incoterms only apply to transporting via sea and inland waterway. So how you transport the goods may have an effect on what Incoterm you agree with your customer, and you might want to keep that in mind. So now you may have previously used Incoterms without realizing, especially when you've previously traded with the EU. Unfortunately, you would require really a full designated webinar on Incoterms to try and cover all 11 in detail. But what we're trying to do on the next couple of slides is we've just provided a bit more information on some of the Incoterms which we feel may be most relevant to you, but also hopefully some of the Incoterms which you may be familiar with. And again, as a bit of a practical example, we're going to be using Business Bob and his customers. So we're starting with Xworks. Now, under Xworks, you are responsible for packaging the goods and making them available to your customer. You're responsible for the costs and the risks up to this stage, but you have no obligation to load the goods onto the transport. It is your customer who will arrange collection of the goods from your warehouse. And the customer, the buyer, they'll be the one who's responsible for the transport of the goods to the agreed destination, including the completion of the relevant paperwork and payment of any VAT and duties. So the risk is on the buyer. And from the visual example, you can see that we've got Business Bob's factory there with the UK flag over top because he's responsible for making them goods available. But every other step of the way, French flag, customer is responsible. Okay, now if you've previously had agreements where the customer organizes the delivery, then it will have been under Xworks, whether you were aware of that or not. Now, completing paperwork also includes the completion of the export declaration within the UK. And the question that you're going to have to think about and what you're going to have to ask your customer is, are they, the buyer or your customer, are they going to be able to complete these declarations? Will they be able to meet the requirements to export the goods from the UK? Also, as the seller, there is no onus on you. But if you twist that round a bit, you can also say that you have no control over the goods. And when you think about your business and your customer relationship, are you prepared to have no control? That's something you'll have to think about. And also, it may create problems if you plan to zero rate the VAT on your invoice, which I'm sure you will do, as you wouldn't have the required proof of export, because it'll have been your customer who's done the export declaration. And we'll come to that again a bit later on. Also, just as another kind of example of X works and maybe what can go wrong, you may want to consider what would happen in the event that the buyer arranges to pick the goods up from your warehouse in a van, for example, but they don't have the correct equipment to load your goods. They may ask to use your forklift truck, but while you are using your equipment to load the goods, it'll be the buyer who's at risk under X works. So I'm just trying to show there the X works maybe does have its flaws, and it can create some confusion and issues if anything goes wrong. And when you're dealing with international trade, you may want to consider whether this is the best thing for you and your customer. So if we now look at the other end of the scale, we're looking at DDP, which is delivered duty paid, which puts the maximum responsibility on you, the seller. So this time you are responsible for delivering the goods to the agreed point of destination. As the seller, you would bear all costs and risk, including clearing the goods at export and for importing the goods into the EU. So obviously that will include the completion of the import declaration and responsibility for payment of import VAT, duties, and any other import charges. So you can see here we've got the Union Jack following the goods all the way through, because in this case it's Business Bob's responsibility to get them to his customer's front door. So you would need to consider, if you're thinking about DDP, whether you can or you have the relevant steps in place to complete customs import declarations and make payment of import VAT and duties. This would include getting an EU EORI number, being VAT registered in that country, and depending on the country, you may need a fiscal representation as well. So all of this will take time and organisation and money on your part. However, if we focus maybe a bit more on B2C and look at selling to a consumer, you might need to consider what alternatives do you have. Is your customer going to be able to complete the declaration or make payment of import VAT and duties? It's unlikely. So this is why it's important to consider not only what is best for you, but what your customer can reasonably contribute or what your customer is capable of doing. Now, we've talked there about the two extremities. The other Incoterms fall in between that. And what we'll do now is we'll just touch on DAP, which is an alternative to DDP. So DAP stands for delivered at place. So again, you as a seller are responsible for delivering the goods, and the risk only transfers to the buyer when the goods are delivered to the agreed destination. The only difference between DDP and DAP is that the buyer, so your customer, will be responsible for completing the import declaration and payment of VAT and duties. So as you can see here, we've got the French flag over the import paperwork and duty and VAT. So if you're selling B2B, then your customer, who's likely to be VAT registered in their country, will find it a lot easier to complete the import requirements than you would. Okay, as a general rule, whether you're importing or exporting, I would say that it's always easier to complete the customs requirements in the country where you are established rather than in the other party or in the other country, and that is worth bearing in mind. Now, I appreciate that we've flown through Incoterms then. We've only really touched on 3 of them, and there are different options, like I said, and you may feel that some of them might be more relevant for you. So there is guidance and further information out there, and where I'd recommend looking is on the International Chamber of Commerce, the ICC's website. You can download a free copy of the ICC's introduction booklet, or a copy of their wall chart, which gives a bit of a visual breakdown of each of the different Incoterms. If you'd like some more detailed information, then you can purchase either a hard copy or an e-copy of the ICC's Incoterms book for, I believe, around the £40 mark. Now, like I said, appreciate we've flown through Incoterms there, but I hope you can at least appreciate the importance of getting them right and understanding your obligations. Unfortunately, it's no longer sufficient to say that you will deliver the goods to your customer. You'll need to be clearer than that and use Incoterms correctly. I have seen examples where that's happening, where there's a long-standing contract where it says they will be delivered, but unfortunately now, particularly with import declarations and import VAT and duties, that needs to be clarified whether we're talking DDP or DAP. So if you've got any withstanding sales contracts that include the word delivery, you need to express and clear that up with your customer and what is exactly meant. But hopefully, by understanding the Incoterms, you'll understand your financial responsibilities and be able to consider this when completing your sales contract. So again, comes back to preparing, understanding what you're able to do, what you can't do, and understanding whatever you're agreeing to, what are the repercussions for that, for both yourself, your business, and your customer. So what we're going to look at now is moving your goods. So now we are going to look at the physical movement and what steps you need to take, or at least consider. So firstly, and I suppose quite simply, you need to check, is your customer ready to import? Now, depending on the Incoterms, your customer may be responsible for importing the goods. Has your customer prepared fully to ensure that no delays occur at their end? It's no good to anyone if you ship your goods when your customer isn't prepared to import, and all that'll lead to is additional delays and costs. So it sounds quite basic, might sound quite daft, but make sure once you've given yourselves the green light to export, make sure you get the green light from your customer as well. So one of the most important documents when you move your goods is your customs invoice. This will usually be your commercial invoice, but it will need to include some additional information which is required for your customs declaration. If there is a commercial invoice, if there is no commercial invoice, then you would need to still provide a pro forma invoice. So this may be the case where you are conducting an intra-company transfer and no physical payment is being made for the goods. So again, look here, brief list of what your invoice should include at least, and to try and get you thinking along the right lines. So we've got the name and address of the seller and buyer, and importantly, the consignee as well, if that is going to be different to the buyer. You'll need your EORI number and VAT number, the place and date of issue, the invoice number, the origin status, by which we mean the country of origin for your goods, commodity code and a detailed description of your goods, quantity of goods, delivery and payment terms, price and currency used, and the package quantity and weight. Now, the value used for customs purposes is calculated using this information, and it's not necessarily the same as the value of your normal sales invoice. So for permanent exports to the EU, you would normally look to zero rate the VAT on your invoice. And again, as I mentioned before, proof of export will be required in order to zero rate the goods. So as well as the customs invoice, in some cases, you may need to provide additional there may be additional requirements and restrictions on your goods. So a product may require licenses or certificates in order to be exported, or a product may have additional labelling and marketing requirements in order to be placed on the EU market. As an example, these could be animal and animal products, plant and plant products, drugs and medicines, chemicals, artworks, antiques, and culturally significant goods. So how do you find out whether there are any additional requirements on your products? Well, again, we go back to the commodity code, which we discussed earlier. I would recommend here using the top link. You can input the country of destination and then the commodity code for that product. And this link or service, what that'll do is that will provide you with the information which is relevant for your product. And that includes what duties payable. So I know we had a question on that before. So that top link will help you work out what duties payable, how to get your goods out of the UK, and how to get them into the destination country. So what we'll do now is we'll use that top link, we'll put it into practice with some of Business Bob's products. And in particular, Business Bob's export of the protein bar to Germany. So on the left-hand side, you can see that we've inputted the commodity code. Like I said, this is using that link that was on the previous slide there. We've inputted the commodity code again to tell it what we are exporting. And you can see at the bottom of that screenshot, you can see that this service provides him with the information on the duty rates, on how to get your goods out of the UK, and also how to get your goods into Germany. On the right-hand screenshot, what that does is that shows the information which is provided on the how to get your goods into Germany tab. As you can see, there are a few special requirements when trying to import a product with this commodity code. So when you're trying to import, when Business Bob's trying to import his protein bar. So there is different information there, and Business Bob will need to make sure that he satisfies all those different points. But we are going to focus on the requirement for an export health certificate. Now, an export health certificate is an official document that confirms your export meets the health requirements of the destination country. There are hundreds of different health certificates, and a list can be found at the below link. And once you've found the export health certificate, the EHC, which fits your product, then you should download that EHC and read the relevant guidance notes. You'll have to nominate an official vet or local authority inspector in the application that you send off to APHA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, APHA. The nominated vet or local authority inspector must be available to complete, sign, and give the EHC to you. The physical copy of the EHC must travel with the consignment to the export declaration. So you'll have to give that to the lorry driver, for example, or whoever's dealing with your transport. An electronic copy should be kept in your records, and also an electronic copy should be sent to your customer in advance. In all likelihood, if you require an export health certificate, then in the destination country, your customer, if they're going to be responsible for the import declarations, they're going to have some steps which they're going to have to take themselves, including pre-notifying their customs. So you'll have to make sure that you send a copy of that EHC in advance of the goods arriving in that destination country. So what does Business Bob have to do then? Well, he needs to understand his obligations to both export the product and to make sure it clears German customs. And that's where this link comes in handy. If there are any requirements you need to meet, then sooner you start the relevant processes, then better it is obviously for you and your customer. If you do not consider these requirements until after the sales contract has been agreed and you've agreed a delivery date, then you run the significant risk of causing delays, which obviously will result in additional costs for you, and in all likelihood, an unsatisfied customer. But appreciate that if there are restrictions and regulations, then it does take time, organisation, and money to set everything in place and make sure you jump through the relevant hoops. So you need to make sure that you consider these costs and obligations when agreeing your sales contract. Again, it comes back to making sure that you're prepared. And just before we move on, I know there's been a lot in the news recently about extensions to grace periods. Unfortunately, these extensions only apply to imports into the UK. So when you're exporting to the EU, the rules and regulations have been in place since the 1st of January. Okay, so you're going to have to put all these things in place as soon as you want to export. I'm afraid there's no grace period when importing into the EU. So next thing you'd need to consider is who is moving the goods. Now I know we've already agreed who's responsible for moving the goods. We did that in the Inco Terms, but in all likelihood, you can take advantage of a third party to help you. You could use a freight forwarder, a road haulage company, who maybe that might link in with a customs intermediary as well, or a fast parcel operator to help get your goods to your buyer. Each option comes with their own advantages and disadvantages. And again, it is another decision which you'd have to make based on your product, your business, and your customer. So for example, it may depend on the size of your goods, the nature of your goods. So we're talking about hazardous goods or extremely fragile goods, and also maybe the time frame for delivery. Now, I mentioned that these three here, they all come with their own pros and cons, but maybe best if we just delve a little bit deeper into these. So it's important to remember, we're talking generally here, and there are always exemptions to the general rule. But if we take freight forwarders first, generally speaking, they'll arrange both the transport and completion of the custom declarations on your behalf. They're likely to offer you a more bespoke service. So if you are attempting to move maybe a larger item, which you fear may be more complex, then it might be an ideal service for you. But as you can expect, for a more bespoke service, you are likely to pay more. Alternatively, if we look at a road haulage company, they may transport the goods for you, but they may not complete the customs declarations on your behalf. So what you need to decide is whether you could do that yourselves internally in your business, or more likely whether you were going to hire a customs intermediary to complete the declarations for you. So all customs intermediary would do would ask you for the relevant information. They input it into the documentation to make sure that that's all goes through successfully for you. Now, some people may feel that this option suits them, but for some of us, they may feel that they'd prefer having one company or one person controlling both the transport and the documentation. And I suppose the last of the three would be the fast parcel operator, or more commonly known as courier. Now, they deal with hundreds and thousands of customers, so you're unlikely to get the same bespoke service that you might from a freight forwarder. There's a greater likelihood then that you will need to adapt to fit their processes and procedures, so they might be very clear on how they do things, and you need to make sure you fit in with that. But in some cases as well, they may be likely to provide the quickest service. So again, each come with their own pros and cons. And regardless of which service you use, it is imperative that you have a good working relationship with that company. It is important that you understand the information they need from you, and in turn, what service they are offering. So for example, some courier services may use their EU EORI number and VAT registration to get your goods into the EU. Now, this may be great if you're selling to a consumer under DDP, as it would remove your obligation to become VAT registered in that EU member state. However, for the privilege of using their EU VAT account, you are likely to have to pay a greater administration charge. So again, speak to them, have that conversation, work out what they need from you, and then work out what you get in return. And having that open conversation and fully understanding that will go a long way to try and make sure that there's no delays in the goods reaching your customers. So that's why it is important to understand what information do you need to give the third party. So what information do you need to give your freight forwarder, your road haulage company, your customs intermediary, or your fast parcel operator? Now, the exact information they request from you may slightly vary, though, you know, as a basic rule, you should provide the following and think about the following. So we need a copy of the customs invoice, we need the delivery address, any health certificates or licenses which may be required, the Incoterm which has been agreed upon, the EORI, any EORI numbers and VAT numbers. Now, depending on the Incoterm and the agreement, as well as your GB EORI number, you may need to provide your EU EORI number and VAT registration, or your customer's EU EORI number and VAT registration. You need to look at the total value of the shipment and the currency, the reason for export. So is it permanent export, temporary export, or will the goods be entering any custom special procedures, which we'll mention again on the next slide. And finally, the origin of the goods. So I think hopefully most of that is either self-explanatory or it's things that we've covered so far. So what we'll have a look at is the reason for export, because like I said, it could be permanent export, temporary, or you could be looking to use a customs special procedure. Now, there are different customs special procedures depending on what you plan to do with the goods you export. A customs special procedures may allow you to reduce or even zero rate any VAT or duty which was payable. So you may look to use a customs special procedure if you are returning goods, if you're exporting goods to be repaired, if you're exporting goods which you know will be returned, or exporting goods to enter a customs warehouse in the EU. Now, unfortunately, again, some of these areas can be quite complex, require a lot more detail for us to delve a lot deeper, which I'm afraid we can't do right now, but at least there you understand and hopefully get you thinking, if it's a permanent export, then that's great, but there are situations, there are times when it might not be, and hopefully you can start thinking about that, thinking about whether any of this might apply to you, and if needs be, you can seek some advice or support, and you can even ask your customs intermediary or your freight forwarder about some of these areas. So hopefully what we've done now is we've prepared, we've dealt with the customer, we've moved the goods. Now, finally, we're looking at import declarations, customs duties, and import VAT. So firstly, because they're very different, duty and the VAT, we'll look at the import duty and the preferential tariff rate. So I'm sure, as you're aware, under the Trading Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, goods from the UK move into the EU or vice versa, but as we're exporting here, we'll focus on goods moving from the UK to the EU, will be eligible for zero tariff rate. But importantly, to benefit from the zero tariff rate, it will need to be determined that your goods originated from the UK or the EU. Now, this is to ensure that goods which originate from a third country do not benefit from the preferential tariff rate of 0%. Now, within the TCA, it outlines what steps you will need to take in order for your goods to be classed as originating in the UK. These are called the rules of origin. Again, unfortunately, it's a complex area, which does deserve its own webinar to give it, but to try and hopefully give it some context, what we'll do is we'll try and run through it briefly, just to again try and get you thinking along the right lines. So, like we said there, understanding the specific rules for your product. So each product has specific rules, and they will outline the steps you need to demonstrate to ensure your goods are eligible for preferential tariff rate. The specific steps depend on the product, and not all products have the same benchmarks for proving origin. Some products will give you one rule which you'll have to adhere to. Other products will list maybe either 2 or 3 different rules. Sometimes you'll have to satisfy 2 separate rules to claim origin. On other occasions, you can choose which rule best fits you and your product. So you can find out the specific rules for your product by using the exporting link, which we mentioned at the beginning of this part of the workshop, or from using the TCA. But importantly, what you need to do that and to read those is your commodity code, and I'll show that on the next slide. But before we get there, I'll just try and give you a bit of understanding of some of the terminology and what that actually means in practice. So if you're looking at the specific rules for your goods, you may see some of these terms. So wholly obtained, these are goods that have exclusively been obtained or produced in the territory of one party, so the territory of the UK, for example. So this might be vegetables which have been grown or harvested in the UK. Secondly, we've got a change in tariff classification. Now, this rule states that all non-originating raw materials must not originate from the same chapter, heading or subheading of the final product. And to clarify, when we're talking about the tariff and the chapter and the headings, what we're talking about is the commodity code and the digits which make up that commodity code. Next on there, we've got the maximum value of non-originating materials, or you might see this, likely to see this written down as max nom. What this is the value of non-UK or non-EU originating material may not exceed a given percentage of the ex-works price of the product. And the final one is production processes. Now, these are specific operations which are particular to certain specialized industries or products. So depending on your goods, you may never see a production process, or if you deal with maybe, or if you're in the chemicals industry or the textiles and clothing industry, you may be these may be a bit more common to you. So we've flown through them. I appreciate that is a lot to take in, but let me just try and show you how this works in practice using 2 of Business Bob's examples. So firstly, we'll look at exporting the ski boot to the business in France. The commodity code, just to remind you, was the 64021210. So as I said earlier, we're using the exporting link to provide us with this information. If you remember, it had a separate subheading for calculating duty, one for calculating duty, one for getting your goods out of the UK, and one for getting your goods into the destination country. And obviously here we're looking at or under the duties heading. So at the top of the screenshot, you'll see that the preference duty rate is 0%, and that is because of the TCA and because we are exporting to France. However, if you cannot claim preferential duty rate, then you would need to pay 17% duty under the most favoured nation duty rate, or that's sometimes referred to third country duty. Now, for this product, to meet the rules of origin, we need to look at the bottom of the screenshot where it explains the basic rule. So you can see here it says production from non-originating materials of any heading except for non-originating assemblies of upper affixed to the inner soles or to other sole components of heading 64.06. Now, to make this easier and simpler with this example, the ski boots have been fully manufactured and processed in China. They've been shipped to the UK and undergone no further processing. So as such, do not meet this requirement. So they would not be able to claim preferential duty rates. So they'd have to rely on the third country duty, and that would have to be paid. And that, as you can see, for this product is 17%. Now, if we look at the Snowboard as a different example, just so we're looking at the export on the Snowboard to the consumer in Austria. Commodity code is the 95061121. You'll see this time when we've imported that into the link, it's given us this information which is relevant to this commodity code. Again, at the top you'll see that the preference duty rate is 0%. However, this time the most favoured nation duty rate is 3.7% for this product. So that's how you can work out what the duty rate will be if you can't claim preferential duty. So that's just for the person that asked that question earlier. Now again, we need to look at the bottom under the basic rule heading to see what the eligibility criteria is for the Snowboard. In this case, it says CTH, which stands for change in tariff heading, or max nom 50% brackets X works, which you remember is the maximum non-originating material rule. So that can be used as well. As it says or and not and, in this example, Business Bob can rely on either of those two rules. In some cases, you'll see it will say and instead, and they are the instances where you'd have to satisfy both. Now, in this scenario, the Snowboard was manufactured in the UK using some raw materials from a third country. The rules of origin is satisfied though because the non-originating material counts for less than 50% of the ex-works price of the goods. So as such, Business Bob can rely on the preferential tariff rate of 0%. Otherwise, he would have had to pay duty of 3.7% as per the most favoured nation duty rate. So hopefully, in this brief overview, I appreciate it is brief, it'll just help you to appreciate what is required to claim preferential tariff rate and how it can affect the overall costs which will be payable. So if we take the ski boots as an example, you can appreciate how paying a duty rate of 17% can vastly increase the costs which will be payable. And again, it goes back to preparing, knowing your product and the sales contract, and understanding whether a duty is payable and who is going to be responsible for paying the duty. So under the Incoterms, whether you agreed that's going to be yourself or is that going to be your customer. If neither you or your customer have considered the duty and it turns up that duty is payable at 17%, either that is going to maybe lead in a financial loss for you, or it might lead to an unhappy customer. So again, prepare, understand your product and understand the requirements. Now looking at import VAT, which like I said, different from the customs duty and different from the TCA and preferential tariff rate, we're now solely looking at import VAT. Now, remember, you only need to be concerned by import VAT if you are sending goods DDP. The VAT rate will depend on the EU country where the VAT is payable. And before you account for the VAT, you will need to become VAT registered in that EU country. Currently, regardless of whether you are selling B2B or B2C, you will need to be VAT registered in each EU country where you sell your goods. Okay, no matter how infrequent or small these goods are. I understand that the plan is this summer around July time, I think the EU is going to make changes for B2C, to consumer sales and the VAT on that. But for now, if we're looking at it now, you would need to count for VAT in each EU country where you sell your goods. So as well as completing the VAT registration, you will in some countries require a fiscal representative. And again, this will take time, organisation and money. So sooner you decide whether DDP is an option for you and you put steps into place to become VAT registered in either one or some of the EU countries, the better for you and your customers. And again, it all comes down to preparing. If this is something you think may concern you, then I would suggest speaking to your accountant or trying to seek some advice from an international VAT consultant. There's a lot of them out there. And also, like I mentioned earlier, it might be worth talking to your courier service, for example, because it might be that how they process the goods, it may be that they're EU VAT registered already and they deal with that themselves before passing that bill on to you. But hopefully you can see that hopefully as you look to expand or as you deal with more customers in the EU, if you are selling DDP, then that means you're going to have more VAT registration, more paperwork, you'll have to be more organised, trying to deal with the different fiscal representatives that you've got and the different VAT registrations. If you put VAT of, let's say, 22%, if you put that on top of a duty rate of 17%, then again, you can see how that can vastly affect and have a big impact on the costs involved for you. And again, it's important that you appreciate them from the beginning. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to look at how you can avoid the pitfalls. So just again, to try and help bring all this to life and move it away from theory and move it into practical sense for you, what we're going to look is some examples of what can go wrong, especially when exporting internationally. So firstly, and as I touched on before, you can, there's failing to obtain evidence of export, which may occur if you use the Incoterm X works. As I mentioned, in order to zero rate your VAT, you need to prove that the goods were exported. Usually, how this would work is, let's say you get a customs intermediary to complete the customs declaration for you. They complete that. You receive what's called a P2P to basically green light and say your goods can be exported. Once they're exported from customs, what you'll receive is an S8 document. And all that is proof of clearance, proof of the export. However, if your customer under X works, they'll be the one completing the export declaration. So they'll be the ones who get the proof of export. So how are you going to get a copy of that S8? And if you can't get a copy, what else can you do, or what other evidence can you provide to prove that your goods were exported so you can zero rate your VAT? If we look at another example here, you did not account for import VAT and duties. So in this example, let's say you send your goods via courier to a customer in the EU. The customer has agreed the price which has been paid to you, and they've paid that, or they believe that's been paid in full and final settlement. However, neither you nor your customer are aware that import VAT and customs would be payable. So as you weren't aware, you weren't able to account for that, or you weren't able to notify the customer in advance. So what happens then is your customer gets an unexpected knock on the door from the courier requesting a payment before they hand over the goods. So the customer would have to arrange for this extra payment, which would be the VAT, the duties, and presumably an admin fee from the courier as well. Is this going to lead to a good customer experience? You'll have to decide whether, how is that going to affect your business? Are you going to get much repeat business? And maybe what can you do to counter that if you're dealing with B2C especially? You know, you need to weigh up the pros and cons between you registering for VAT in the EU or finding a courier who will pay the VAT on your behalf in the EU, or are you willing to put a note on your website and send a note to the customer to explain that they will have to pay the VAT and the duties when the goods are delivered? So that's all a business decision, but hopefully you can appreciate that if you weren't aware of that, so obviously then your customer wasn't aware of it, if they just get an unexpected knock on the door, it's not going to go down well. Next one, your customer wasn't specific enough on the destination for the goods. Now this might seem quite obvious, but if we say, for example, your customer has asked you to deliver the goods to Rotterdam Port, well, Rotterdam Port is huge, and if you're going to use that as an example, you'd need to say, for example, what terminal within Rotterdam Port the goods need to be delivered to, where specifically is the destination. And a good example there, and a good practice to get into, is include the point of destination, detailed description of destination in with your Inco terms. So here in the example, we've put DAP, so it's going to be delivered at place. And we said point of delivery is number 1, ABC Street, Berlin. And as you should with good practice, we've just put Inco terms on the end there, and we should have said 2020 as well. But it's important that you give a detailed destination, and that there is that example shows how you include that with the Inco terms. Include that in the information you give your courier, your customs invoice, and include it on your sales contract as well, because if anything goes wrong down the line, that's the information that they're going to come back to. And if you've included that clearly, then that will certainly help. Next, we're looking at underestimating the duty which will be payable. So you may have a sales contract agreed with a new customer or an outstanding customer which you haven't changed. The goods were sold on the Incoterm DDP. You send those goods as usual. You've obviously accounted for transport and things like that, but what you haven't accounted for is the import VAT and the customs duty. And all of a sudden, when you get stopped, when you're trying to import it into the EU, and you've got to cover those charges because you're trading under DDP, then all of a sudden you could be looking at a financial loss. And that's why I said all the way back when we're talking about Incoterms, it's important, whether it's yourself or whether you have a designated sales team, that they understand the Incoterms and the differences now with trading with the EU. Because this could be a common mistake or a slip up where someone hasn't appreciated the duty and the VAT which would be payable, and depending on the size and the price of the goods, that can have quite a large detrimental effect on your business. So again, just want to say what I said a few times already. It comes down to preparing, knowing your products, so understanding commodity code and understanding what requirements you have to export that product. Better prepared you are, easier it makes it for you, and easier it makes it for your customers. We'll quickly, I've just added a slide in here, just over kind of a bit of a development that's happened this week that might be of interest to people. Not sure if people have seen, but the Brexit Support Fund is now opened for applications and become available. And what it is, it's a grant of up to £2,000 to help SMEs access training and support on how to complete custom declarations, how to manage custom processes and use custom software and systems, or any real specific importing or exporting related aspects, including VAT, excise goods and rules of origin. So some of the stuff that we've talked about today, there's a link there, and that might be something that people want to or wish to take advantage of. And I'm sure if they need any help or support trying to locate the right training or support, then through the phone numbers, the email addresses, the websites that were given through Northeast LEP and Tees Valley Business, hopefully through there you'll be able to find out where you can access support that you may need. So I think all that's left for me to say really is thank you very much for attending. Hopefully there what we've done is try and get you thinking about all of these areas, how they affect you, your business and your products, and hopefully try and get you thinking in international trade, and also what's changed, mainly what's changed since the 1st of January. So thank you very much everyone from me. Thank you for attending. I think what I'll just do now is quickly pass back over to Tracy, who just wants to tell you very quickly about what's coming up in the next week or so. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. That was really useful, and I hope everybody enjoyed it and got something out of it. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. What's coming up next? As Ben mentioned, we will be making available more information, including a transcript of all the Q&As, so you can get that. We'll get that to you afterwards. I'd like to thank Northeast Growth Hub and the Tees Valley Business for making this webinar possible. They have asked me to highlight that they will be contacting attendees to ask for your feedback following the webinar. They've promised me it's just a couple of questions. It's just really, really quick. So we'd be grateful if you would take a few minutes just to complete that. I also just wanted to highlight we have some more webinars that we're running next week, starting on Tuesday morning. For anyone who's interested in importing goods from the EU, on Tuesday, 23rd, 10 till 12, we will be running a webinar focusing on importing. On Tuesday afternoon, if there's anybody that you know that you think might benefit from this particular webinar on exporting goods, we are rerunning it on Tuesday afternoon. Or if you want to attend it again yourself, you're more than welcome to, if you want to focus on something in particular that we've whizzed through. Then on Friday, next Friday, the 26th, 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 till 12, we're running a webinar on importing and exporting services, which is different again. And then lastly, on Friday afternoon, 2 till 4, we will be rerunning the importing goods from the EU webinar. So you've got a choice there of Tuesday morning or Friday afternoon if you want to attend that one. So all that's left for me to say is, as Ben mentioned, this was just an overview to help you understand what to look out for and hopefully avoid some of the potential pitfalls that can go wrong. If you have any additional questions, or even if you just want a general chat about your own specific business or situation, both of the growth hubs, the Northeast and the Tees Valley, provide free one-to-one support. If you're based in the northeast of the region, you can contact on the screen there the Northeast LEP Growth Hub via their website. You can express your interest in that and they can get somebody to contact you. And if you're in the Tees Valley region, if your business is based in the Tees Valley, there is a 24-hour support line for EU export questions. The telephone number's on there, or you can email us directly at the EU Business Support email address shown on the screen. So all that's left for me to say is thank you for attending. We hope you enjoyed it and got a lot from it. We hope to see you next week, but in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you very much.